PowerPoint. I teach on the children's literature modules in third year, the golden age of children's fiction in second year, and on the child in literature in the first year. So it's kind of self-explanatory, really, isn't it? The first one that I've written, and the second one I've contributed an essay to, and the third I co-edited and contributed an essay to. So I love talking about children's books. Children's books is absolutely my speciality. I just wanted to draw your attention to this slide. When you read to a child, when you put a book in a child's hands, you are bringing that child news of the infinitely varied nature of life. You are an awakener. I love this quotation because initially it makes me feel all cutchy. Think, oh, I love reading with a child, it's such a special moment. But when I start to step back and really consider it, the child here is passive. The adult is doing everything that is active. The adult is reading to them. The adult is choosing that book. And that is how children's literature seems to work. I often wonder if children's literature should have an apostrophe at all, because everything belongs to the adult. The adult writes it. The adult publishes it. The adult edits it. The adult chooses it. The adult chooses which book to teach, which book to censor, which book to pick up off the shelf. So that brings you to a lot of the stuff about the politics of children's literature. Also, you might want to ask what kind of a world that we're introducing the children to. Is this a world that is all white? Is this a world where boys have the best adventures? And we might say that our children's literature is changing, but it's a slow process, as you'll find out if you come and do some of these modules. Dahl, because I should know the slides here. As you'll all know, I'm sure, about the Colston statue having been taken down, or pulled down and thrown in the harbour. And I'm suggesting that we do something similar with some of our children's books. What is it that makes a classic? We can ask our children, we can show our children that actually they can question these books, they can have agency. It's because when we walk past the statue, we may not notice it. When we walk in a street name, we might not notice the implication of the street name, but actually all of it is having an effect on us, all of it matters. And it's the same with literature, and particularly so children's literature, because we give it in many ways to our most impressionable readers. So therefore, we're not just spending 5 minutes before bed, but we're showing them a world. But whose world are we showing them? Dahl, of course, as you all know, remains very popular. Okay, this is a little snapshot I took at World Book Day this year. Again, the shelves are full of his books, and then there's some photographs here of Cardiff in 2016, when the whole city stopped and celebrated his centenary, almost like it was like a rugby match day. So he also has plenty critics, though. Lots of people won't touch Dahl. They say he's racist, they say he's misogynist, and that his texts are violent and very much black and white. So this is the dilemma of Dahl, essentially. One of the things that I think is really interesting, if we're going to address this, and I think kids can talk about this too, but stop for a minute and think about the Oompa Loompas. The Oompa Loompas, as we can see here, are the great mysteries of the chocolate-making world, the faint shadows that appear behind the windows late at night. Dahl likes a shadow and not quite knowing who's there. Think of the BFG. And it's this story. So Grandpa Joe tells the story of the factory workers getting thrown out because they're all spies, and then the factory closing. And once the factory opens again after a few months, nobody can work out who is working there. And when it starts opening as well, there's a little white smoke, almost like, it reminds me of the Pope, when a new Pope is announced. It sounds a little bit like that. And there's something there's a lot of biblical threads in this story. Of course, it's some kind of Pilgrim's Progress, but only the best child wins, except that best child, Charlie, well, is he a hero? Because what does he do to be a hero? Not very much. He's silent, doesn't ask too many questions, and is a good boy. Bit like Cinderella. She gets on with her chores, doesn't ask any questions, and someone comes to pick her up. Some prince in shining armour. But actually, what are we doing when we're teaching our children that? We're teaching them to be passive. and that's what will reap rewards. To be honest, I'm not sure it is. Anyway, so they say, think about how this applies to Oompa Loompas, that when you say Coco, they dribble at the mouth. You're like, is this a pet or is this a person? So we're into its own interesting discussions already. When Wonka goes to collect them, he says that the leader of the tribe was in the treehouse smashing up caterpillars to eat. Wonka climbs up and says, and Wonka speaks Oompa Loompa-ish rather than English, "Look here," feels like it needs an old chap. "If you and your people will come back to my country and live in my factory, you can have all the cocoa beans you want. I'll even pay your wages in cocoa beans." Again, they're kept in the factory. They're not allowed to leave the factory, and they are fed on cocoa beans. It's dubious, isn't it? And then we're told that he smuggled them over in large packing cases with holes in them. Again, pretty dubious in terms of transporting people. They're wonderful workers. They all speak English now. Is that to be celebrated? Are they allowed to speak Oompa Loompa-ish? Have they had all their culture taken away? They love dancing. Has he civilised them? They love dancing and music. They're always making up songs. They're rather mischievous. They wear the same clothes they wore in the jungle. The men wear deerskins. The women wear leaves, fresh each day. And the children are naked. Veruca, then, wants her very own Oompa Loompa. And again, you come to that question, is it right that she should have an Oompa Loompa? Would it be like a pet? Is this trafficking of people? And actually, how come Wonka gets them? Wonka also used the Oompa Loompa in his testing rooms. If you note at the illustration, often, it's not an exact fit, but often there's a pattern, I think, in Blake's work, where Charlie has dots for eyes, and Wonka has big bulgy eyes. And often the very good characters, the heroes essentially, just have those dots. Matilda's the same. And I wonder if it's perhaps telling us or suggesting something about Wonka. Wonka is this strange, magical hero, slave owner. Which one is he? Well, the real Wonka, stand up. So I got my children to do this. It's called a Diamond 9, and I gave them different words to describe them, and somewhat worryingly, one of them came up with slave owner and hero on the same line. Again, it's quite interesting. So what I'm suggesting is that the books that we read, the streets we walk down, the statues we eat picnics by, all of that shows that ideology is effectively the air we breathe. Okay, it's not such a jump then to turn to discussion of human rights and slavery. You can see this is the original illustration of the Oompa Loompas, and here this was published in this way. Nobody batted an eyelid, not the editors, not the author, and Dahl, in fairness, was quite taken aback when the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People complained. And he said, I'm quite surprised about this, because surely I was saying that the Oompa Loompas were really quite good, and they were with all these white children, and then he changed it to they didn't come from Africa anymore, but came from the Oompa Loompa island. But I'm not entirely convinced, to be honest, that makes it very much less racist given all the other stuff. I think it's casual racism, and the fact that nobody noticed it at the time is very much implicit in that idea that children's literature enforces a certain ideology. Colston, of course, has been taken out of the harbour. He's been fished out, but he's going to the museum. I don't know if you agree or don't agree with that, but he's going to be displayed with his graffiti. And I think we can do something similar with children's literature, that we display it with the graffiti. We talk about where we address it, we think about it, we talk about it, and we look at what has gone before in terms of ideology. It's so much fun. So, do something similar with Dahl, with BFG. It's got such a scary beginning, again in the shadows. You can read it yourselves, but it's the idea of being stolen. Sophie, again, is stolen in the middle of the night. Absolutely terrifying. And he says, well, you're only a little girl. You haven't stolen you very much. Is BFG a good character or a bad character? Similarly, when we come to race, think about those giants wearing their loincloths, not civilised, as opposed to the BFG, who wears his kind of nice little, you see there, nice little Dickensian kind of outfit, and not speaking properly, being cannibals, and in the end the British Army, guided by the BFG to somewhere unmappable, the Oompa Loompa-ish was also unmappable, the British Army pick them up while they're asleep, take them away and put them in holes in the ground so that tourists can look at them. Again, these interesting things that we may not have spotted because we tend to think of children's literature as just being children's literature. But they're really important. There's so many big questions, and you can read for yourselves the depictions of the blood butler. So, also I would suggest that while everyone, lots and lots of critics, suggest that Dahl is on the side of the child, some critics, Hall and Coles, suggest that actually all Dahl's texts are a two-finger gesture to the adult world. But what I would say here is it's the adults that are the most interesting characters and that take up the most space on the page. It's interesting, isn't it? I just want to I'm going to leave you with this. This is Gender and Why Gender Matters. This is Piers Morgan. There's a lot going on here in terms of patriotism. Of course, the England batsman is celebrated, and the American footballer not so much. But also there's something going on with gender in terms of how much space men are allowed to take up and how much space women are allowed to take up. And I will just leave you with the fantastic Mr. Fox taking up space, and yet when a woman does it, she could well be a witch. Thank you very much for your time. Come and join me and we'll have lots more discussions. Thank you.